Did you know that there's a new charitable tax deduction? This means that you can save money by donating to charity and make your dollar go further by giving back to your community. If half of all DMV married couples who don't itemize fully use this new deduction, we would raise $1 billion for local nonprofits. Spur Local's Everyday Giving Pledge is a simple commitment you can make today to give more and give at least half of your donations to local nonprofits. Visit everydaygivingpledge.org to learn more. Today on CityCast DC, the DC Council this week voted to allow independents to vote in DC primary elections. This is a potentially huge change in a city where the Democratic primary essentially picks the mayor. But wait a minute. You might be saying to yourself, didn't I already vote for this? Yes, in fact, you did. DC voters approved the change by referendum 2 years ago, but the council refused to fund it, so it wasn't in effect for last week's primary. My colleague Emma Uber has been reporting on this issue. She is here to explain what changed. Today is Thursday, June 25th. I'm Michael Schaefer. Here's what DC is talking about. Hey, Emma.
Hey, Mike.
So you've been reporting about independent voting in the primaries. Like I said, independents have always been unable to vote in DC primary elections. They feel a lot of people who are independents, or for that matter, who are anything but a Democrat, often feel locked out of city politics because the Democratic primary is often the only election that matters. And around here, there's a lot of like journalists and government workers and stuff who, for reasons, don't want to state their party allegiance. How do we get to this change?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. These past few weeks, I've kind of become immersed in this fiery debate that I had no idea existed. But it's one that's been essentially a decade in the making. There have been advocates for a long time, particularly Lisa Rice of Grow Democracy, that have fought really hard to include independents in DC party primary elections. And they thought maybe they won 2 years ago when 73% of voters voted yes on Initiative 83, which was to pass ranked choice voting and include independents in the primary. But then last year, they were thwarted again when the DC Council voted not to fund the semi-open primary part of it. So earlier this week on Tuesday, the DC Council got to a place where they voted to fund, which is like roughly $1 million, semi-open primaries in DC, which means that in 2028, independents in DC will be able to vote in the party primaries. Presumably, when people say they're able to vote in the party primaries, I assume the vast majority of independents will be voting in the Democratic primary because, as you said, in deeply blue DC, Democratic primary is often the only election that matters.
Right. There's not a whole lot of upside in being an independent and registering to vote in the state Green Party primary. So how many people were we talking about? I was surprised in your reporting because DC was, 95% voted against Trump. I was surprised that the size of the population of independent voters.
Yeah, absolutely. Numbers vary. I've seen different numbers from the council, from the Board of Elections, from Grow Democracy, but pretty much everyone agrees that there's between 80 and 90,000 registered voters in DC that are not registered with the party. And so that's roughly 18% of the electorate, represents a larger percentage of the electorate than registered Republicans, say, in DC. And so, I mean, if you tally up what's on the Board of Elections website right now, you get to, close to 89,000 voters that are registered independent or not registered with the party.
So the argument for not allowing them to vote in party primaries was, you join a party, you're making a statement, and then you as a member of that party should get to have some say-so over what your party nominates. Who's making that argument, and why did it not carry the day as best you could tell?
Right. I mean, there's been long-standing and in some ways valid concern among the parties that they should be allowed to pick their own nominee. Democrats should be able to pick the Democratic nominee, and Republicans should be able to pick the Republican nominee. And nationwide, it's a concern that if you open up primaries, bad faith actors from outside your party can come in and try to elevate an intentionally weak candidate to be your party's nominee. So, for instance, a bunch of Republicans could come in and potentially vote for a really bad Democrat to be the Democratic nominee. So then in the general election, they get trounced. I spoke with some political strategists and some political historians. Some people still have that fear in D.C., but I think a lot of the convincing attitude for some council members was that that's less of a concern in DC because there just may not be like the sheer number of Republicans here necessary to like sufficiently meddle in a Democratic primary.
When this was being debated, both ahead of the referendum and then again when it was whether the council would fund it, it tended to be the old line party establishment who was resistant to this change, and for that matter, to ranked choice voting also. These are people who are smart enough to see the numbers in D.C. and know that there's not going to be some sort of secret Republican cabal conspiring to put a weak candidate up. So why were they really against it?
Yeah, that's a good question, Mike. I mean, the D.C. Democratic Party has been extremely against ranked choice voting, and the semi-open primary, they actually sued to get the ballot initiative taken off the ballot. Obviously, that was unsuccessful. And they really tried to convince voters back in 2024 to vote against it. That was also unsuccessful. And so, yeah, they've talked about, this violates the rights of Democrats to pick their own nominee. So that's a big part of it. But to me, some of the people that were against opening up the primary in the council vote last year kind of surprised me. Oftentimes we see the council vote along their own kind of party lines. Like there's the centrists and there's the progressives. The vote last year in which they rejected funding to open up the primaries did not follow along those conventional lines. We had Kenya McDuffie, more capital D Democrat, and Robert White, more of the progressive bloc, voting together to both oppose opening up the primary last year. And so that's kind of why I sat down with some political strategists and I was like, what's the strategy here? Why would they have done that? And it was interesting. I mean, none of the experts I talked to thought that any of the independent bloc voting would have stopped JLG from winning because she won by such crazy margins. But most of the people I talked to expected that Kenya McDuffie might regret that vote because they thought the independents might have made it a little bit closer for him.
Right. So this was a big refrain during the campaign that if independents could vote, McDuffie would be doing much better. On the face of it, it made some sense in that he is the more centrist candidate and people who are not on the left, are more likely to recoil against JLG. But your reporting suggested not, both because JLG amassed a very large coalition of Democrats to win, but also because that sort of, at least in D.C., misreads who the independents are.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a misconception that independents are just Republicans in disguise. And I think that's definitely the case for some people, perhaps, or maybe they fall more to the center. But that is not at all like the majority or the entirety of DC independents. DC is unique because, I mean, as you said at the top of the episode, there's a lot of people here that, regardless of where they fall on the centrist to progressive spectrum, they just don't want to publicly signal their views because maybe they're federal workers. And especially right now, they don't want to be a registered Democrat, while working for the administration. Maybe they're journalists like us and they don't want to give people in this low trust environment a reason to doubt or assign a political agenda to their reporting. Maybe they're judges. Like, there's lots of people here there's a disproportionate amount of people here that have politically sensitive jobs and would have reason to not make their political affiliation public. And also, there's kind of this younger block of independents that actually may even be farther to the left than a lot of registered Democrats. I mean, I was shocked when a recent CNN poll found that 47% of Americans right now identify as politically independent. That's a huge number. And the large majority of them fall under the age of 40. And so I think there's a lot of young people that just kind of ideologically disagree with the two-party system and are disillusioned with it, and so they don't want to register as Democrat or Republican. But these are actually people that if you ask them to align with anyone on the DC Council would probably be way more closely aligned with Janice Lewis George than they would be an Anita Bonds or a Kenya McDuffie.
Right. And it was only with the sort of rise of the Democratic Socialist thing that people who identified as socialists were willing to join the Democratic Party.
Yeah, absolutely.
Don't miss Folger Theater's How Shakespeare Saved My Life, playing now through July 5th at Folger Shakespeare Library. The autobiographical solo comedy by Broadway star Jacob Ming Trent has been called a vivid, deeply personal narrative about survival, resilience, and the transformative power of language by stage and cinema. Born with a gift for poetry but rejected as unfit to play the part of a poet, Ming Trent invites us to take a deep dive into the crevices of his youth. Calling on the bard and a host of genius rappers, half-crazed preachers, and soulful poets, he takes us on a propulsive ride that reaffirms the power of language and music. Folger Theater delivers yet again, says the Washington lobbyist. Go see it, bring a friend, talk about it after. Tickets start at $20 and can be purchased online at folger.edu or by phone at 202-544-7077, Tuesday through Sunday, 11 a.m. to 6 p.m. Get yours today. So the other thing in this, if it wasn't going to make a difference in the election we've just had, the other argument for why people should do it is because it was the will of the people. The people voted for this. How did they justify not acting on something that was part of a referendum that is part of our legal system?
That's a good question. And I went back and I watched the 2025 vote. And interestingly, there wasn't much public debate over it. Brooke Pinto, actually the only council member at the time who then became a candidate in this most recent election to have supported opening up the primary last year, she proposed the amendment and she basically said, look, I'm a proud Democrat, but this is the will of the people. And no one really vocally opposed her on that. Some people were like, well, we take issue with the funding source. Like, that's why we're going to vote no, which, okay, it is a rounding error in the council's $22 billion budget.
But the vote was 9-2, right?
But this time the vote was 9-2 in favor. Last time it failed 6-5. So it was quite close. And council members, I don't know if they thought that it would be unpopular, kept it quite close to their chest. Like no one, even though 6 council members voted no one really got up there and took like a loud stand about why they were going against it, And Janice Lewis George voted present. She didn't weigh in on either side last year.
Did anybody explain why they changed their mind? Who changed their mind?
Yes. So this was helpful. I mean, Zachary Parker was quite transparent. He put out like a whole statement basically saying, I admit that I was wrong last year, which I think was I found kind of refreshing. That it's so often that as journalists, we have to like track down lawmakers and be like, your votes are inconsistent, X, Y, Z. And he just came straight out and was like, my vote today is going to be inconsistent with my record. He said, I've been talking to a lot of constituents and I've had a change of heart. He said that during the meeting on Tuesday before he voted in favor of including independents in the primary, he said that he initially felt very defensive. He said, especially as a black man in D.C., having watched people, he shouted out Councilmember Anita Bonds fight in the Democratic Party to give people representation and elevate leaders he really respected. And he felt that intentionally or unintentionally, the inclusion of independents was meant to weaken the Democratic nominee. And that just was the attitude he had. But he said that he was kind of forced to confront, A, that it was the will of the people, and B, he said that during the election, he had conversations with people with politically sensitive jobs that felt like they did not have a meaningful say in the city. And so it was refreshing to hear him talk really transparently about how his thought process had evolved. Robert White said something similar. Robert White was interesting to me because in the vote that failed in 2025, Lisa Rice, one of the main advocates, has said publicly that he had told her that he was going to vote yes. and then he voted no. And so I think people were kind of interested to see where he landed this time around, and he voted in favor. He voted yes. And similarly, he said that he was moved, specifically speaking to some of his constituents who didn't feel comfortable in this political climate publicly identifying with the party.
If Louis George was going into her mayoral election, having won possibly the exact same size majority in a field that included independents, in a way that'd make her look stronger. I mean, it wouldn't make that much of a difference, but she'd be able to, when people said, oh, well, those crazy Democrats did it and then no one else could stop it, there would be a sort of instant rebuttal to that. Before I let you go, last question. We go to vote in D.C., and there is a procedure that involves showing your party, and then they will steer you to your party's ballot. What's going to happen in 2028 when people go into the polls?
Yes, so independents will be able to choose which ballot they would like to vote on. Again, I would expect the vast majority of independents will choose the Democratic primary, and they will be able to vote on not quite a full slate, but most of the Democratic primary questions. For instance, like if this election at the very bottom of that Democratic ballot, you saw inter-party positions, like people that were, not many people made it to that point of their ballot, I don't think, but that like leadership within the Democratic Party. To my understanding, I think they still have to figure out some kinks, and they have 2 years to do it. But to my understanding, independents still will not be voting in that contest. They still won't be, as it stands right now, be able to sign petitions to get Democratic nominees on the ballot, but they will be able to vote on the majority of contests for the party primary of their choice.
But if I'm a registered Democrat, I can't just go and vote in the Republican primary.
No. But I will say I talked to a political strategist that worked on Robert White's campaign, has been around D.C. politics for a while, staunchly opposed to opening up the primary. And his argument was like, whoever can register for whatever they want to be and change it right back after the race. So I guess you could if you wanted to change your registration. But...
Emma, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
And that's all for today here on CityCast DC. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our morning newsletter. And become a CityCast DC member to support our work. You can do that at membership.citycast.fm. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye.